All right, good morning, everyone. It's 9:30. Time to get started. I'm going to get a drink of my water real quick. And we'll get started. I'm finally starting to get used to only having a few people in here. It's still odd, but I'm finally starting to get used to it. But we'll get started with a word of prayer, and then we'll continue on in this series. Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the many blessings that you give us, and as always, the opportunity we have to gather together and worship you, to study your word, to learn more about you, and hopefully we take what we learn and we can apply it and take it out to our everyday lives and use it to bring others to you, Lord. I ask that you continue to be with us as we go through this virus situation, that you continue to allow it to improve, for those who are sick to get better, and for the numbers to decrease, and for us to be able to get back somewhat to a normal routine in life, Lord. And just ask you to be with all those who are sick, who need our prayers, and we just thank you for everything you do for us, for sending your Son to die on a cross. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. Yeah, it is. I believe it is. Can y'all hear me in here? Okay. Yeah, it's on. I'm good. You can turn me up a little bit more if you need to. Kyle, can you hear me? Okay. So we're going to continue this series, and I called this series A Day in the Life, and I joked last week that I did not realize this was a Beatles song when I had already titled it and started doing some Google searches around it, but it's interesting. To review real quick, what we've done and what we're doing is we're going through the lives of, and in this situation, we're going to try to cover three aspects. This one here is where we're going through a non or unchristian, non-church person, as we use a lot of times in the vocabulary. Basically, people who've never really had any kind of church introduction or existence whatsoever. What we're going to start next week is we're going to look at things from a Christian standpoint, people who kind of grew up in the church, raised in the church. And then the third part of this series that we're going to look at is going to be life as a Christian, kind of from two different viewpoints of how we should go through our everyday lives, and maybe what that will look like in some cases, and what maybe it should look like in other cases. But I'm going to stick with two terminologies. I'm going to present these every week, and the first one's sympathy, and that is a shared feeling, usually of sorrow, pity, or compassion for another person. You show concern for another person when you feel sympathy for them. So you feel bad for them, you feel bad for their situation when you express sympathy. But what we're looking for here is empathy. And this is going beyond sympathy. It's stronger than sympathy. Say that real quick and you get tongue-tied. It's the ability to put yourself in the place of another and understand someone else's feelings by identifying with them. So actually kind of putting yourselves in their shoes to understand what they're going through and have more of a connection with them, and that's empathy. And so that's what we're looking for as we go through this series. The verses I'm using around this, and we'll go around these every week, and that is 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 through 23. And this is where Paul's writing to the Corinthians. He says, "Even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under that law. Even though I am not subject to that law, I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. When I'm with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from the law so I can bring them to Christ, but I do not ignore the law of God." And that's the key thing here. So when I talk about the things, and I talk about a lot of the scenarios that we're looking at through this series, I'm not in any way saying that we need to involve ourselves in the sinful lifestyle of some of the people that we talk about, but we need to understand, and when we see the things that they are going through in our experience and are doing, we still need to have an understanding of that and maybe why they're doing it. So we can still have empathy with them, but not jump in and do the things that they are doing. So I want to express that. He said, but I do not ignore the law of God. I obey the law of Christ. When I'm with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. In most translations, this say, I become all things to all men, so that I may save some. And in the last verse, I do everything to spread the good news and to share in its blessings. So last week we looked at 3 different people. It was Christine, Jacob, and Caleb, right? Was the last one. My mind just went blank on that last one for some reason. Huh? And so the first one we started with, and to give you some background if you didn't watch last week, Christine grew up in a horrible childhood where she was abused physically and sexually, and she had a single mom. She had abusive relationships, and then when she was 16, she found out she was pregnant and she had an abortion. And we kind of looked at some of the things that if you do some searches around social media and the internet around this stuff, and if you were in her situation, you saw things that if I was this person and I was in their shoes, then there was no way I would show any interest in coming and being part of church because of that. And so what I want to do, and I said last week that was that was a hard thing to look at when you see some of the things and you see that people actually do and say some of the things that they say. So what I wanted to look at this week was how can we change that, or how can that look different? And so one of the things with Christine, and we're going to continue her story, was several years after she had gone through and had the abortions and stuff, she started, and this happens in a lot of instances, and they'll try to say that it doesn't, but it does. For the most part, there are a lot of depression, anxiety, psychological issues with women who have abortions. It's not a blanket thing. But there is a lot because it's a mental thing that you know of, and I'm not going to get into the details of it, but there's a ton of studies around it. So she starts to ask maybe some of these questions, and for her, luckily for her, she one of her coworkers is a Christian, and that Christian invites her to church. So there's several ways or directions that this scenario can go to, and there's more than 2, but I'm going to lay out 2 kind of more common directions or layouts that this can actually go. But the first one is, so we have 2 different directions, and we have experience 1 we're going to talk about. So Christine's coworker, I didn't give her a name, but we'll just say her coworker invited her to come to church with her. And so there's 2 different experiences or 2 different ways this can go. And some of these we may even experience ourselves, because I know I have. The first one, you walk in and she invites you to this church, and you walk in and it's a very unfriendly church. No one's really smiling. You see some people, no one really says hey to you. And the people who do see you can kind of watch them, and they see you as you walk in, and you can see them go to avoid you. It's like, whoa, I don't want to really have that interaction. It's like they're scared to death of you. And so you go in and you sit down, and we're going to say that maybe your friend who you work with or who she worked with knew that particular Sunday they were going to be doing a series or maybe a lesson on abortion or something around that. And so that's why she invited her. So maybe it would be good for her to have this experience and to see what the Bible has to offer. But then the person who gives the lesson, they get up and they start to talk about it, and the things they talk about is how evil abortion is, and how everyone who all these people are murderers and they're all going to hell, and all this. It's kind of this hellfire brimstone type sermon. And you have someone in the audience who has had an abortion and who has done these things. And what do you think her reaction is going to be? Good. Not good, right? It's going to make her feel very unwelcome. Go ahead.
We had a minister who was involved in California, who was involved in dealing with abortions, stuff like that. And he got up one morning and really lit into it. And I got up afterwards and I said, hey, God forgives everybody. Yeah. And God loves us when we repent and do what we want us to do. I didn't want to leave the impression for people out there that was it. It's all over for you.
Yeah.
You have to remember God loves you. And God wants you to come into grace with Him.
Yeah. So to repeat what Steve said, basically he was in an audience where this happened, something similar to this happened, and he got up afterwards and said, talked about God's grace and forgiveness for those who have, and that's what we need to do, and because there are a lot of times, especially abortion, it's a very passionate issue for us Christians, as it should be, but we have to learn how to express that passion in a way that's not going to, run someone who may have been through that situation off. Because a lot of times, like I talked about last week, we live in our own little bubble sometimes, and we forget that there are people out there who go through situations and go through horrible life experiences and make decisions that they feel that's the only decision they have at the time. And so we need to be there for them to help them pick up those pieces after the fact. And so there are a lot of times, and I've been in it, I've seen it where these kind of things have been said, if not from the pulpit or the stage, but from the audience, itself, if there's a class or some things like that said as well. So, and this is why these two perspectives are important to see, because yes, there's truth in what's said about abortion being murder, and those that practice it and continue, they don't seek forgiveness. Yes, the Bible talks about their fate. But there's a way to present that without, kind of the hellfire brimstone bringing someone completely down and, scaring them to death and running them off when doing it. So then we can look at experience 2 or direction 2 where they invite her in, and maybe this is a situation where the friend knows, again, we talked about the friend knows the background, so maybe she gives some of the people who are going to greet her a heads up of, hey, this is the situation, kind of give her a little bit of background information. And so when they see her, they're warm and welcoming, right? When she walks up, they're warm and welcoming. She comes in the building, everyone introduces, treats her like family. She feels like when she walks through the door, immediately that this is, these people are just super friendly and warming. And as she's going through, someone hands her some information about ministries that are in the church. And as she's flipping through the little pamphlet on the ministries, she sees one ministry, and it's called the Unplanned Pregnancy Ministry. And the title of it's Embrace Grace. And this is actually a true ministry. I'm not going to tell you where, but it is. And, it talks about how, it talks about those people who have had unplanned pregnancies or are in the midst of it, and maybe they had an abortion, of how, we can come about and how forgiveness is on it. And then, so that same Sunday, again, we're in the same situation where there's going to be a lesson on this particular subject of abortion, and the minister or teacher, whoever gets up, has a lesson on it, but does it in a way where, yes, we see that it's something that's condoned. It's God does not approve of this, but at the same time, he talks about the love and forgiveness and grace, like Steve just talked about, of Christ. And then maybe even, take it a little bit further, maybe there's some real-world examples of women in the church who have gone through that and have come through and given their life to Christ. And maybe they give a testimony, or maybe they're available for you. If you need to, you can go and talk to them, and they can talk about their experience with you and what the way they've come through it. So now let me ask you this: if you go through these two different examples, which one are you going to stay, and which one are you going to run away from? Right? That's pretty obvious. And then this is the kind of stuff that I think sometimes we overlook, is because there's a lot of times that we do not put ourselves in these people's shoes when we know they're coming, when they're going to walk in the door. Especially someone like me. I mean, they're not everyone who's in the church. Obviously, we have people who have had rough backgrounds and have gone through a lot of things. Someone like me, it's a little bit harder for me to put myself in someone like this' shoes because I've never had to experience that or see it. So the best I can do is show empathy and try my best, but you never really know. But if you can take someone who's done it, been through it, lived through it, and converted, and you can connect them, then you wholeheartedly, you're going to be able to change that situation so much better. So that's kind of Christine's experience. And what we want to see in this, in a day in the life, we want to see experience 2 happening in the church. Where people walk in with a ton of past baggage, and we have people in the church who've experienced that same baggage and are willing to work with those who are coming in and help them relieve that and show them, hey, look, you're not the only one, you're not lost, We can help you get through this. And then the same thing in a lot of our messages too. You know, a lot of people, and I'll take a side. I was going to do it at the end, but I'll do it now. A lot of people say, well, Chad, you're just watering down the message. You're watering down the Bible. And that's not the case. If you look at the way Christ, those same people would actually accuse Christ of watering down the message then. Because if you look at his experience and how he treated every single person from Zacchaeus, who was a tax collector, from the woman at the well, to the lady caught in adultery, to everyone who was in a life of a very sinful lifestyle, he was very compassionate. He was truthful with them, but in a loving way. He didn't bark at them and just attack them, and I believe he showed empathy for them. I think he knew he could see, he knew what they were going through, what they were experiencing, and he was able to connect with them and show them compassion. Still told them the truth at the same time, but did it in a loving way. All right, so last week we looked at the second one was Jacob. And to give you, for those who were not here last week, Jacob's background. He was born to two parents, and obviously all of us are born to two parents, but they were married when he was born, but as a toddler they got a divorce. He was raised by, they both actually at that point came out as gay, his father and his mother, but he was raised by his mom and her partner. And we talked about a lot of the fact that they were active in gay rights events and parades, and some of the horrific things that were said to him, and all the way up to the fact that urine was thrown on him. So if we catch up with Jacob after midway through his childhood, about high school age, Jacob has a close friend who is a member of a local church, and she invites him to come to church and experience with him. Well, his background, he's very hesitant because of the things that he has seen and the things that have happened to him, but she convinces him to come. And I'm only going to do, I'm going to do both. So he's in high school at this point, so that Jacob's here is a little bit younger than what Christine was when she started going into church. And his best friend, who's, I say his best friend, a good close friend of his, invites him in. So he could have two experiences, and we'll go through this. And so he could go into experience one, and he went to the youth group events that they were having at the church. And we could have someone, get up and talk about homosexuality and how it's an abomination and how they're all going to hell. And, some of the things that we see, the rhetoric we see a lot of times, either, in comments and on Facebook and social media and even on the media itself. And kind of we could live up to, or that congregation, that experience could live up to how the media tries to portray us and people try to portray us in the real world. Or, obviously if he goes in and has a experience like this, he's not going to stay. He's not going to come back to that, and he's not going to have anything to do it. Or he could have an experience where he comes in and it's a youth group meeting, and he sees they talk about this subject, similar like they talked about the abortion subject at the other church. And there's a message of how it's wrong and what the Bible says about it, but at the same time there is love and compassion and grace and an invitation to those, an openness to those who may have that lifestyle to come in and to still worship with them and to be part of them. But again, not condone it, but hey, look, you're invited here, and we want to work with you. So later on, he continues to go. Jacob continues to go with this friend, and then he's converted, and he becomes a Christian. And then as he grows up and he goes into college, he decides, I'm going to become a preacher. And he becomes a preacher, and as a preacher, he then converts his mom and his dad and his mom's partner, through showing the same kind of love, grace, and acceptance. And to this day, Jacob still preaches and teaches. And one of his main focuses that he preaches on is what the Bible says about homosexuality and how to convert those who struggle with that or live in that lifestyle. So let me ask you this. Do you think option 2 or experience 2 could have happened through experience 1?
2, we haven't looked at.
I'm sorry. Experience 2 was I'm sorry, I might have gone through it real quick, too quick.
Condemned it right
Yeah,
away.
yeah, condemned it right away. I mean, so, and that's the thing is, it's amazing what can happen if you show that compassion and that empathy. If someone walks into a congregation and there's this teaching on it and it's constant, it's all condemnation. Even in I've been in somewhere you walk in and from the opening prayer to the closing prayer, it's talking about this particular subject of homosexuality. I mean, they mention it in prayers and how let's get rid of it and those kind of things. And so there's a way to go about that, but you've got to learn, especially as a church, if we're going to tilt ourselves or try to opening ourselves to the outside world, we're going to have to learn how to show compassion and how to empathize with people who come from all these different backgrounds. Because if we get up and we say things, these absolute statements with just harsh undertones and what's going to happen, it's going to drive people away. You're not going to run people. And again, I'm not talking about, people will accuse you if you don't do the fire and brimstone and the say it like it is type things, then you'll be accused of watering down the message. And I don't think that's the case. I think you can take it and you can present the message in a way similar to how Christ did in a loving way, but still let people know that this is wrong, but this is the options that we have to the love and the grace that's behind it. So that's Jacob's story. And then the last one, was Justin. And so Justin's background was, basically he grew up in everyday America type lifestyle of, had 2 parents, middle income, not an absent father or anything like that, loving parents, but he just got mixed up and he had to, we'll just call it an addictive type personality, and he got addicted to drugs and alcohol and pornography and just struggled with it real bad. And so as Justin got older, we talked about his experience of trying to look up some information about church and trying to get himself better, but there was just a lot of, when he looked it up and did some of these searches, there was just a lot of just hateful things out there that he saw. So Justin decided, if I'm going to get myself better, then I need to do something about it. And he didn't like the what he saw about going to the church idea, so he thought, well, I'm going to go to either AA or I think it's called NA for Narcotics Anonymous, but Alcoholics Anonymous, and work through that. So he gets involved in that, and he becomes friends with someone in his group, and they invite him to church. And he's reluctant, and he kind of pushes him off for a while. But then one day he says, "You know what? I'll go." And he goes, and we're going to kind of go through. So experience 1, he goes, and they're kind of friendly, not standoffish. They welcome him. He's invited. He feels invited and kind of welcome and a little bit of warmth there. But they talk about this subject a little bit, and and some of the comments that are said is, you just got to show them tough love, or if they really wanted to get clean, then they'd really get clean, and they'd make their lives better, and some of they're trying to be helpful, and they some of the things that they're saying, they feel like they're trying to be helpful, but there's really no one there that's really ever gone through it or experienced it and can help guide it. So it wasn't a horrible experience, but it wasn't the best, and so it kind of pushed him away a little bit. And so he's like, well, I'm just going to stick with my AA group and go through there. And that can be, I've seen that happen before. I've walked into scenarios or sat in classes where I've seen things like that said. But it could be experience 2, where he goes into church, and as he walks in, it's very open and loving, friendly like the other one, but maybe a little bit more. And then they hand you some literature maybe, and you look and you're going through and seeing the different ministries that they have, and one of the ministries is Celebrate Recovery. And you start reading into it, and you see that it's a group of Christians who are that run it. Doesn't have to be all Christians, but but they celebrate recovery and have a program for it at the church where it's around using Christ and His love and His guidance through the Bible of helping people who've had some sort of addiction or sinful lifestyle or problem come in and walk through the recovery. And then as you see some of the people talk about it, you see that it's actually former addicts helping current addicts, recover. And so because they know what they've been through, and they know, what they've experienced, and they can help guide them along and bring them through the process. And so Justin decides, you know what, I'm gonna belong to this. These people are really trying to help me. And through that process, Justin's converted and becomes a Christian. Again, what's the difference between 1 and 2 there? Because this one's a little different. The other one's 1 and 2. There's a pretty stark contrast, right? Of the damnation side of things to the very loving and open grace side of things. This one's a little bit closer. They were friendly on number 1 and trying to be helpful on number 1, but number 2 they took it a step further, right? They went above and beyond with actually having a program and having former addicts that they've recovered and helped out because they know people who've been there and done that and can help them get through it. And that's kind of the points that I'm trying to get to and help people understand, because there's some common denominators in these different things here under these different situations. And I'm going to ask this question for the group in here and those out there who can ask. What was the one thing that all 3 of these had in common as to why they came and showed up at church?
Reached out to them.
Right.
And tried to help them where they were at and guide them in the right direction.
They all had a friend.
They all had a friend, right? They all had a friend who invited them. It wasn't the preacher or an elder or a deacon, although we're supposed to do that. They had a friend who they invited to church, right? Or they had a friend who invited them to church, all right? The ones who were successful, what's the experienced 2s in all of these that were able to, when someone was invited and showed up, what was the common denominator in all 3 of those? They showed love and compassion and grace. They were ready for them. Right? They expected them to come and be there and were ready for them to be there. And then the third thing, which the message style and the things that are said to them and the comments said to them, if they said in it was truth, but it was done in love and compassion and grace. And that's the experience and the things that I want us to look at ourselves. Now, from my perspective of our church here in Lake Park, I think we do a pretty good job in a lot of these areas. But with anything, I always think there's room for improvement. There's always ways to get better and to go above and beyond. And I would almost put us in the category of Justin, with, very friendly, but just maybe not have enough experience yet to help someone in that situation. I don't know if we have that, or if we do, are we ready for it, and are we prepared for something like that? And so those are the different kind of areas I look at. And so, how is our worship experience? How would most of you in here, and you can at home can answer yourselves or comment on it. If you come in here, how do you feel like our worship experience is for the most part? For someone who would be from an outsider's point of view.
Traditional.
Very traditional? How about our messages for the most part? I'm not picking on Dad, I'm just saying.
What do you mean?
Like, how do we, from a communication standpoint, or from how we met our messages go out to people, how do you think they're received for the most part? From someone not in the church, from an outsider perspective. And you can answer, Dad, because you give a lot of them.
funny.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of your dad's greatest strengths, and this is one, whether it's here on the pulpit or if it's over at GCS, is he talks to people and he teaches people from a realistic standpoint. And he's also not someone who points the finger and says you don't do this. He lets people know. You know what? Just like me, I'm human. I've screwed up. I've made mistakes, and that's very real to people.
Yeah.
And I think that realism is what makes Marvin so successful in what he's doing and the messages that he sends forth. That realism is something that not everybody pushes forward within the church itself.
Yes. Yes. So to wrap up what Terry, to summarize it, because it was good, word for word, yeah. Basically, and I've said this before, is if you've ever sat in a lot of Dad's messages, and even in his classes, you know that most of his messages and all that stuff is it's a down to earth, I call it salt of the earth type messages of, look, I'm no better. I've been through the same things. I've done probably worse than you have sitting out in the auditorium, and I think people can relate to that. And I think that's part of, like what Terry said, what makes him as a preacher be so successful and his messages be so successful. I've seen people who are very intelligent, have very good very good degrees, have a lot of degrees, masters, doctorates, and all that stuff, who were good speakers, but because they could not, show that empathy, get into other people's shoes, their messages and their the way they talked, it was almost like they were talking down at you. That you were up here, he was up here, and they were down there. And so I don't think that's intentional, but I think it's a learned thing. One, I think it's learned, but two, I think some of that you've had to gone through it yourself. And then that's why when we talk about, things like, having someone, I love, on the abortion issue, the Robertson, I think it's Al Robertson's wife, I forget her name off the top of my head, but she writes about this. She actually did have an abortion, and she writes about it, and she talks about, and having people like that in your church, obviously it's not like we're not going to go, hey, who's done this? But if you have someone who can open up about that and say, look, I've been through this, and walk others through it, or maybe talk someone out of it who may be, considering it, have that option, having that unplanned pregnancy type option. It's a lot nowadays, or sometimes in the church, it's, you're looked down upon, or you're kicked out, or if you have an unplanned pregnancy, there is no, you're welcome, let's show you grace. It's, well, you messed up, see you later. And so we've got to change the mindset around those type of things. So we need to have those experiences available for people. So beyond just our worship experience, and when people come in here, yes, I agree with Terry. I think we are, the Church of Christ in general is more traditional, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And actually, if you look at some of the studies that's out there, some of the newer generations are actually looking for more of that realistic, almost traditional type experience. That they don't want something that's a show. They want something that feels real and feels intimate. And so I think there's some positive benefit about being that. But I agree. I think for the most part, if someone comes into this building, no matter their background or what they've done, they're going to feel welcomed and opened. Go ahead.
Question: I have, since I've been a minister, made it a point after every service to hone in my radar on visitors.
Yep.
I've upset some members because I would spend a long time talking with them about something because I'm leaving them and going to the visitors. And I grab the visitors and I always ask them because I want to know what they, what their experience, that morning, that evening, whenever it was, what their experience was. And for the vast majority, they have always given and maybe some of them just being friendly, I don't know. But the vast majority of them really sing the praises of the church here and said they felt welcome as soon as they come in the door. Some people say we felt like family as soon as we walked in the door. We've had several members of other congregations that have visited us that have also said the same thing. Yep. So that's to our credit, I think. Not that we can't do better, but no. I think we are at least headed in the right direction.
Well, and to speak to that a little bit, Dad talks about how he hones in on visitors, and he does. I mean, even in our meetings, the last thing that Dad talks about every meeting is make sure that we improve on greeting our visitors. We can always improve that. But one of the things we started doing here in the beginning of this year, we actually started sending a survey to people who visited, asking them, hey, what did you think of our services and where can we improve? And for the most part, the same thing that Dad said, and that's a area where they're not sitting in front of your face, they're typing the keyboard and say whatever they want. Most of it was a positive, not to pat ourselves on the back, but most of it was a positive. There was some things, hey, this would be nice to see, and so it's good for us to see those because, we get in our ruts sometimes in the church, and you get in that zone and you kind of tune some things out sometimes, so it's good to see. So beyond our worship experience here, because the idea, and one of the things I'm trying to push and I want to push is, our evangelism and our experience in reaching out to the world needs to be beyond the four walls of this church. So my question then is, what kind of Christian influence do you have? Think about what are the things that you say or have said. And I look back sometimes, and I look back at some of the things that I've said to people, and I cringe almost because it's like, at the time I thought, I was doing great, and I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, and then you look back at it, and it's like, man, that was not useful at all, and in fact, that probably drove that person away. Go ahead.
I've written sermons that I preached 20 years ago that I've since thrown in the trash.
Yeah. So Dad just mentioned that he written sermons that he preached 20 years ago that he's thrown in the trash, and I can think about that. I mean, there's things that I've written, and I can go through my Facebook, and there's times where I want to go back through my Facebook 10 years ago and just want to delete some of the things and I hope no one ever goes back and looks at all of them because, at the time you think, well, you're trying to prove your point, you're trying to show what's right, you're trying to stand firm, but then at the same time you're just driving people away, and maybe it's truth of what you're speaking, and maybe some of the things that you're sharing, yeah, there's a truth to it, but it's not the truth in love, right? It's just plain truth, and sometimes there's I see some things that are shared, and there's no love behind it. And in fact, that's the exact opposite. There's some animosity, and there's some, I won't say hate because that's a strong word, but there's some really strong feelings behind some of the things that are shared. And so, you think about that. You just kind of think back. I mean, you probably do it just the last week, and think back through what is everything that. Then you think of the things that you've said to people, or that you've commented to people, or have said about people and to them, or maybe it got back to them, and you wonder, is this the experience, or is this the Christian influence that I want others to see if I'm going to try to get them in the church? And I think a lot of this goes back to, we become, as churches, we become so insider focused that we get to, when you're constantly only seeing these things from the inside, and you're not seeing things from an outside standpoint and a point of view, it gets easy to get into that mindset of, well, this is right, this is wrong, you should know better, right? And so you lose that empathy that you have, with connecting with people. So I think we need to make sure we open up and we connect with people outside of our Christian world. That's another problem so many times too, is we've become just, all of our friends, and this is good, right? I mean, we need to have Christian friends, but that's all of our friends, right? We don't even, if someone's not a Christian, we don't hardly have anything to do with them. And so how are we going to influence someone if we don't befriend people who are not Christians? And so I think sometimes we've got to step out of our little bubbles a little bit and expand that so we can bring other people into it. So that's kind of my first scenario. It's I don't know how I feel like about going through the rest of them. I may change it up a little bit. But I told my sister, and I promised her I'd tell her which one of those was actually a true story. And the true story is Jacob. He was the one that was born to parents who divorced when he was a toddler. And his parents decided they were both gay. And so he was raised by his mom and her partner. And they did go to, they were very active in the gay pride events and the marches, and he did, he talks about all the things that were said to him by quote unquote Christians, even to the point of having urine thrown on him as a kid. And growing up, he had a friend. I don't remember if it was his best friend, but it was a close friend who invited him to church. She invited him to church, and he went, and it was a wonderful experience. And it was a youth event where they talked about love and grace and forgiveness for everyone. And it wasn't the damnation and the condemnation and all this, everyone's going to hell type thing. It was a very loving and open. And so eventually he was saved, became a Christian, and then grew up, continued to go through the church, even though his moms didn't agree. And then he did go into seminary and become a preacher. And he talks about the day that he was preaching, and he invited his two moms and dad to come, and then he talks about them coming, and then that experience of actually converting them and helping them change their lifestyle. All because someone who was close to him invited him to church, and that experience of going through that was one of love and compassion, and not one of, talking down and almost hatefulness around that situation. That can be hard for us sometimes. But and then the rest of those scenarios, they're I say true stories. They're not one particular person. They're testimonies from different people who've gone through different experiences, the good and the bad. But I wanted to kind of show those different spotlights and those different ways of how things and how we are seen and how you can be seen even though you may not mean to, and how you need to be aware of and show an awareness to how you reflect and how you come off to people. And so I thought that was interesting. I actually heard Jacob's story probably several years ago. I was listening to a podcast, and just listening to that podcast of his life and his story and his mom's and his dad and the things that they went through, it was heartbreaking to listen to. It really was. But, to hear him come out the other end of that because someone showed him what Christ was really like, and to see what can come out of that was very uplifting to see that on the other side of it. And so that's what I want us to be. I want us to be those friends who invite the people to church that maybe other people wouldn't even invite to church because of, maybe their past is so bad or because of some of the things that they have done. Sometimes, and that's my question, and I was going to ask this in the first round, but I wanted to wait to the end. Are we the kind of church where you feel comfortable inviting someone like that? I personally think we are. I would be comfortable, but think about that. Is a lot of the churches that maybe you've attended or you know of, would you be comfortable inviting them to go to that particular church? And if not, then we as a whole, we need to look at, why not? And what do we do to change those experiences and change, how we approach people with different backgrounds and different lifestyles? So that is the experience, I guess, or the day in the life of someone who is what we consider unchurched or has very little church experience. I got 2 minutes. Any thoughts? Terry.
Paul wrote, imitate me just as I imitate Christ.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we struggle. Every one of us is having and displaying the heart of Jesus to everyone that's out there. Because if we're looking at how we treat people on a daily basis, regardless of their background and what they go through, if we as Christians could focus on trying to do that, just having and displaying the heart that Jesus had, how he treated people. And part of that is actually getting in the Bible and reading this, and understanding it and seeing it, and not listening to Joe, Fred, or whoever. You know what I'm saying? Is getting in it ourselves to really understand how Jesus treated people. And I think we did that. That helps us because it lays out how you treat people.
Yeah.
So I would say displaying the heart of Jesus.
Yeah.
Along that same line, what Terry's saying, Paul says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, in a very sinful city, in the city of Corinth. He says in verses 9 and 10, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? And he names names. Mm-hmm. And he says, do not be deceived, neither fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, effeminate, homosexuals, thieves, the covetous, drunkards, revilers, or swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. So he taught the truth.
Yeah.
See, I don't want people to miss that point.
Yeah.
But then he says in verse 11, such were some of you.
Yeah.
But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and the Spirit of our God.
Yeah.
So I think that's the key. He didn't sugarcoat things. He called sin sin, but he did it as we've studied at the beginning in a way that he become all things to all men, so that he could bring them to Christ.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're talking about here. That
Yes.
we have to do.
Yeah. And I agree. And so, for those who did not hear, to sum up, because I got less than a minute, Terry talks about showing a heart of like Christ, being reflecting Christ in who we are. And same thing with Dad, who talks about, we reach out to those people, but, we tell the truth, but we do it in a loving way and say, look, we can even say, look, I was the same way. These are some of the same things that I did, and can continue that message. And I tell you, if we can, I don't think we're ever going to master this, but if we can get this right and do this really well and connect and show empathy toward people, then you will get a whole lot more people in the building, and you'll be able to connect, because it's needed. I think needed even more. I think there's a sense of loneliness and even more separation now that we're all stuck in our houses, and people are having to deal with a lot of that. That's hard on especially people who are going through a lot. And so I think this is a time now where we can reach out to those people, especially when we start meeting back, get them in here and be like, look, this is who we are. This is what we're about. Let's show you the love of Christ and show you what that can be like. So I'm over by a couple of minutes, but next week we will look at things from a Christian standpoint of those who've grown up in the church and some of the things that they experienced growing up in the church. Thank you.